Ma'am, step away from the aircraft. Right now. The words sliced through the quiet hum of boarding conversations so suddenly that dozens of heads turned at once. Vanessa Brooks paused halfway into the first-class cabin and slowly looked over her shoulder. Two airport security officers stood near the boarding door. Behind them, travelers waiting in the jet bridge stretched their necks to see what was happening. For a moment, nobody spoke. The soft glow of cabin lights reflected off polished armrests and overhead compartments while the distant sound of engines drifted through the aircraft. Vanessa remained calm. At 43 years old, she had learned that calmness often revealed more than anger ever could. Dressed in a tailored charcoal business suit and carrying a small leather travel bag, she looked like any executive traveling for work. Yet the expressions around her suggested many people had already decided she was something else. One of the officers stepped forward. "We need you to come with us." A murmur spread through nearby rows. Passengers exchanged confused glances. A man in first class lowered his newspaper. A woman stopped placing her luggage into an overhead bin. Vanessa slowly removed her boarding pass from her jacket pocket. "Is there a problem?" she asked politely. The officer glanced at the document but did not take it. "We just need to verify some information." The answer felt strangely vague. Vanessa noticed several passengers staring directly at her now. Some looked curious. Others looked uncomfortable. A few seemed to assume the worst without knowing a single fact. The aircraft suddenly felt smaller. Colder. A young mother seated across the aisle tightened her grip on her daughter's hand. The little girl looked toward Vanessa with innocent confusion. "Mom," she whispered softly, not realizing others could hear. "Why are they stopping her?" The mother hesitated. "I do not know, sweetheart." The girl looked around. "Then why is everyone staring?" No one answered. Vanessa felt the weight of dozens of eyes following her. It was a feeling she knew too well. Not because of this airport. Not because of this airline. Because moments like this had appeared throughout her life in different forms. Different cities. Different buildings. Different people. The details changed. The feeling rarely did. Near the front galley, Airline Operations Manager Rachel Evans glanced up from her tablet. Something about the situation immediately felt wrong. She quickly reviewed the passenger manifest again. Seat 2A. Vanessa Brooks. First class ticket. Priority boarding authorization. Everything appeared normal. Rachel frowned and looked toward the officers. Meanwhile, another security supervisor approached from the jet bridge. His name badge read Ethan Miller. His expression carried the confidence of a man convinced he was making the correct decision. "Ma'am," he said firmly, "please come with us." Vanessa studied his face for a moment. "Have I violated any policy?" Ethan folded his arms. "We just need clarification before departure." Again, no explanation. Again, no specifics. Around them, silence continued spreading through the cabin. Even passengers pretending not to watch were listening. Vanessa glanced briefly toward the window beside seat 2A. Beyond the glass, evening sunlight painted the runway in shades of gold and orange. The aircraft was nearly ready to leave. Then she looked back at Ethan and gave a small nod. "All right," she said quietly. She picked up her bag and stepped away from the seat she had legally purchased. As she followed security officers back toward the aircraft door, every conversation in the cabin seemed to stop. And not a single person yet understood that the woman being escorted off that plane held the future of the airline in her hands. The aircraft door closed halfway and then stopped as Vanessa Brooks disappeared into the jet bridge beside the security officers. Inside the cabin, the silence lingered long after she was gone. Conversations resumed eventually, but they returned in whispers. Passengers who had never met her suddenly found themselves discussing her. Some assumed there must be a reason. Others seemed less certain. The little girl across the aisle continued staring toward the empty first-class seat. "She did not seem dangerous," she said quietly. Her mother offered a small smile, but did not answer. Near the front galley, Rachel Evans refreshed the passenger manifest for the third time in less than 2 minutes. The information remained unchanged. Seat 2A belonged to Vanessa Brooks. First class fare fully paid. Priority boarding approved. Security clearance complete. No alerts. No restrictions. No notes requesting intervention. Rachel frowned and looked toward the aircraft door again. Something about the situation refused to make sense. Meanwhile, several yards away inside the terminal, Vanessa walked calmly beside Ethan Miller and another officer. Travelers moved around them carrying coffee cups and rolling luggage. Some glanced toward the small group before continuing on their way. Ethan led her toward a security office near the boarding area. "I would like to know what this is about," Vanessa said politely. Ethan kept walking. "We are verifying information." Vanessa noticed he had repeated the exact same phrase 3 times. Still no specifics. Still no explanation. The fluorescent lights overhead reflected softly against the polished airport floor. Finally, they entered a small office containing a desk, 2 chairs, and a computer terminal. Ethan gestured toward a chair. "Please have a seat." Vanessa sat without argument. She placed her leather bag beside her feet and folded her hands calmly in her lap. Ethan reviewed several screens, while another officer remained near the doorway. Minutes passed. Then more minutes. Vanessa watched the second hand move across a wall clock. Through a nearby window, she could see part of the aircraft still connected to the jet bridge. The plane had not departed yet. Back inside the cabin, boarding delays were beginning to attract attention. A businessman checked his watch. Another passenger asked a flight attendant if there was a problem. Rachel answered professionally, but her concern continued growing. She opened Vanessa's profile again. This time she noticed a special designation buried within the reservation details. It was unusual. Not celebrity status. Not government travel. Something else. Before she could examine it further, her supervisor instructed her to prepare for departure. Rachel reluctantly closed the screen. In the security office, Ethan finally turned toward Vanessa. "Can you confirm your occupation?" Vanessa looked at him carefully. "My occupation?" Ethan nodded. "Yes." Vanessa's expression remained calm. "Why is that relevant to a boarding verification?" Ethan paused. "We simply need accurate information." Vanessa noticed that he still had not identified any actual issue. Around them, the office felt smaller with every passing minute. Outside, airport announcements echoed faintly through the terminal. Finally, Vanessa answered. "I work in finance." Ethan typed something into his computer. His expression revealed nothing. Another few minutes passed. Then his phone vibrated. He glanced at the screen briefly before slipping it back into his pocket. Whatever message had arrived appeared to deepen his confidence rather than reduce it. Across the airport, however, a very different conversation had just begun. In a corporate conference room nearly 800 miles away, several executives stared at an empty chair scheduled for a very important guest. And for the first time that evening, someone asked a question that would soon send shockwaves through the airline. "Has anyone heard from Vanessa Brooks?" The question hung in the conference room like a storm cloud. Around a polished table overlooking downtown Chicago, 6 senior executives exchanged uneasy glances. A digital presentation remained frozen on a screen displaying projections worth billions of dollars. Coffee cups sat untouched. Phones rested face up beside notebooks. The empty chair at the head of the table suddenly felt more important than anyone in the room. "She never misses meetings," one executive said quietly. Another checked his watch. Vanessa Brooks had been scheduled to arrive nearly 40 minutes earlier. That was not like her. Not even close. A woman from the investment team opened her laptop. Her assistant said she boarded the flight. The room grew silent. "Then where is she?" No one answered. Back at the airport, Vanessa sat patiently in the small security office. The fluorescent lights hummed softly overhead. Ethan Miller continued studying information on his monitor as if he expected the screen to confirm a suspicion he could not quite explain. Vanessa watched him without speaking. Years of experience had taught her something valuable. People often revealed themselves when given enough silence. Outside the office, travelers hurried through the terminal carrying backpacks, briefcases, and cups of coffee. Life moved normally for everyone except the woman waiting for answers that still had not arrived. Ethan finally looked up. "How often do you travel?" Vanessa smiled faintly. "Quite often. For business." "Usually." Ethan nodded as though every answer somehow supported a theory only he understood. Vanessa glanced toward the wall clock again. More time had passed. The aircraft she was supposed to be sitting on remained connected to the gate. Delays were becoming expensive, yet no one seemed concerned about that. Meanwhile, Rachel Evans could not shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong. She reopened the passenger manifest while standing near the galley. This time she searched beyond the standard reservation details. Her eyes narrowed. A coded notation appeared beside Vanessa's profile. It was not visible in ordinary booking records. Rachel clicked deeper. Access denied. She tried again. Access denied. The system was protecting information associated with that passenger. Rachel leaned back slightly. In her years with the airline, she had seen that level of restriction only a handful of times. A chill ran through her. Across the terminal, Ethan's phone rang. He answered immediately. Miller. His expression changed slightly as he listened. Yes, she is here. Vanessa looked up. Ethan turned away and lowered his voice. The conversation lasted less than 30 seconds. When it ended, he appeared more determined than before. There are still questions we need answered, he said. Vanessa remained calm. Questions about what? Ethan hesitated. Your travel activity. Vanessa almost laughed at the vagueness of it. Almost. Instead, she simply nodded. Through the office window, she watched the evening sunlight fade beyond the terminal glass. The sky had shifted from gold to deep orange. Somewhere hundreds of miles away, another phone had begun ringing. This time it reached the office of the airline's chief financial officer. The caller identification displayed the name of a major investment firm. Within seconds, concern spread through executive offices. Within minutes, senior leadership began making calls. And before the hour was over, powerful people across the airline would discover that the passenger sitting quietly inside a small security office was not merely a delayed traveler. She was the person holding the future of their largest financial partnership in her hands. Rachel Evans stared at her screen long after the access denied message disappeared. The glow from the monitor reflected across her face while passengers continued settling into their seats around the cabin. Something about Vanessa Brooks was triggering protections Rachel had almost never seen before. Yet no one seemed interested in asking why. The aircraft remained parked at the gate. Flight attendants moved through the aisles answering questions from increasingly impatient travelers. Outside the windows, the last traces of daylight were beginning to fade. Rachel opened an internal employee communication system and searched for Vanessa's reservation number. Again, restricted access. Again, unusual security controls. Her concern deepened. Across the airport, Vanessa remained seated inside the security office. She had now spent nearly an hour waiting for an explanation. The clock on the wall ticked steadily forward. Ethan Miller reviewed documents, checked messages, and occasionally asked questions that seemed disconnected from one another. How many flights do you take each year? He asked. Vanessa looked at him calmly. Enough that I stopped counting years ago. Ethan typed something into his computer. And where are you traveling tonight? Vanessa almost smiled. The destination printed on my boarding pass. The officer near the door lowered his eyes to hide a reaction. Even he appeared uncomfortable with the direction things were taking. Vanessa noticed it immediately. Most people reveal their doubts before they speak them. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away, the atmosphere inside the Chicago conference room had transformed completely. Executives were no longer discussing financial projections. They were trying to locate Vanessa. Calls were placed. Emails were sent. Assistants checked schedules. One senior partner finally reached a member of her travel team. The answer created instant silence. She boarded the flight. The room froze. Are you certain? 100%. A second executive frowned. Then why is her phone inactive? Nobody knew. Back at the airport, a new message appeared inside the airline's executive communications network. Rachel happened to see the notification while updating departure records. At first she ignored it. Then one phrase caught her attention. Urgent passenger location request. She clicked. Her eyes widened. The request originated from corporate headquarters. The passenger name listed at the top was Vanessa Brooks. Rachel felt her heartbeat quicken. Suddenly, several pieces of the puzzle began fitting together. She opened another internal directory and entered the name. The search results appeared instantly. Rachel stared at the screen. For several seconds, she forgot to breathe. The woman removed from the aircraft was not simply a passenger. She was founder and chief executive officer of Brooks Capital Partners, one of the largest investment firms in the country. Rachel read the profile twice, then a third time. A recent business publication article appeared beside it. Another profile followed, then another. Everywhere she looked, the same name appeared connected to major investments, corporate acquisitions, and multi-billion-dollar partnerships. Rachel leaned back slowly. The realization sent a chill through her. At that exact moment, Ethan's phone rang again. This time the number belonged to airport executive leadership. His confident expression began fading as he listened. "What do you mean headquarters is involved?" he asked. Silence followed. Then his face lost color. Across the terminal, airline managers were suddenly leaving offices. New phone calls were being placed. Senior leaders were asking questions nobody had asked before. Who authorized the removal? Why was the passenger detained? What evidence existed? And perhaps most important of all, who had failed to recognize the woman currently sitting inside a small security office while a $5 billion partnership waited for her arrival? The atmosphere across the airport had changed, even though most travelers remained completely unaware of it. Flights continued boarding. Announcements echoed through the terminal. Coffee shops served customers. Yet behind office doors and inside executive phone calls, urgency was spreading faster than any aircraft on the runway. Rachel Evans stood motionless beside a service station near the front galley. Her screen still displayed Vanessa Brooks's profile. Founder and Chief Executive Officer. Billions under management. Major strategic partnerships. National recognition. The facts were undeniable. Rachel looked toward the closed aircraft door and felt a knot form in her stomach. For more than an hour, a passenger with a valid ticket had been removed from a flight without anyone providing a clear explanation. Worse, nobody had stopped to question whether the decision itself was justified. Across the terminal, Ethan Miller lowered his phone slowly after finishing another conversation. The confidence that had defined him earlier was beginning to crack. Questions were arriving from people far above his level of authority. Questions he could not easily answer. He entered the security office and found Vanessa exactly where he had left her. Calm, patient, composed. The same leather bag rested beside her chair. The same quiet dignity filled the room. Vanessa glanced up. "Have you discovered what information needed verification?" she asked. Ethan hesitated. For the first time all evening, he did not respond immediately. "We are still reviewing the situation." Vanessa nodded slowly. "I see." Her voice remained polite, but the silence afterward felt heavier than before. Outside the office window, she noticed ground crews preparing another aircraft for departure. Lights blinked against the growing darkness. Travelers moved through the terminal carrying their own stories, their own destinations, their own assumptions. Vanessa wondered how many of them had experienced moments like this. Moments when people decided who they were before asking a single meaningful question. Back in Chicago, the conference room had become a command center. Phones rang continuously. Executives moved in and out carrying updates. One senior partner finally reached a member of the airline's corporate leadership team. The response stunned everyone present. She was removed from the aircraft. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then one executive leaned forward. Removed for what reason? The answer came back uncertain. Nobody seemed able to explain. That uncertainty created more concern than any explanation could have. At airline headquarters, senior leaders were now reviewing reports in real time. Reservation records showed no violation. Security databases showed no alerts. Identification records showed no discrepancies. Every system pointed toward the same conclusion. Vanessa Brooks should never have been detained. Rachel's phone suddenly vibrated. An internal message appeared. Corporate leadership was requesting immediate details regarding the passenger incident. Her heart sank. The situation had moved far beyond a simple boarding delay. She looked again at Vanessa's empty first-class seat. The blanket remained folded neatly where it had been left. A bottle of water sat untouched beside the armrest. Small details, ordinary details, yet somehow they made the situation feel even more wrong. In the security office, Ethan received another call. This time he listened far longer than before. As the voice on the other end continued speaking, the color slowly drained from his face. When the call finally ended, he stared at the screen for several seconds without moving. Then he looked toward Vanessa. For the first time that evening, uncertainty replaced authority in his eyes. And somewhere deep inside, Ethan began realizing that the woman he had treated like a problem was about to become the biggest problem his career had ever faced. Vanessa Brooks remained seated as the security office grew quieter around her. The tension that had once filled the room was beginning to shift into something else. Uncertainty. Ethan Miller could feel it. Every new phone call seemed to create more questions instead of answers. He stood beside the desk staring at his computer screen, scrolling through reports that all pointed toward the same conclusion. No security alert. No fraudulent ticket. No travel restriction. No violation. Nothing justified what had happened. Yet somehow the situation had reached this point. Vanessa watched him carefully. She had spent years negotiating billion-dollar agreements. She knew the difference between confidence and doubt. Ethan was no longer operating from confidence. Outside the office, airport traffic continued moving through the terminal. Families hurried toward gates. Business travelers checked departure boards. Flight crews walked past carrying rolling bags. To them, it was another ordinary evening. Inside the office, however, a very different story was unfolding. Ethan finally sat across from Vanessa. For the first time since she had been removed from the aircraft, he appeared interested in having an actual conversation. "Ms. Brooks," he said carefully, "how long have you worked in finance?" Vanessa studied him for a moment. The question was different from the others. Less accusatory, more curious. "More than 20 years. Ethan nodded. "That is a long time." Vanessa smiled faintly. "Long enough to recognize patterns." Ethan lowered his eyes briefly. He understood the meaning behind her words. Neither mentioned it directly. Neither needed to. A silence settled between them. Not hostile. Reflective. Across the airport, Rachel Evans was now speaking with a regional operations director. Her voice remained professional, but urgency crept into every sentence. She explained what she had discovered in the reservation system. She described the unusual restrictions attached to Vanessa's profile. She reviewed the timeline from boarding to removal. When she finished, the director remained silent for several seconds. "You are certain?" he finally asked. "Yes," Rachel replied. "I checked multiple times." The response on the other end came immediately. "Do not let that aircraft leave." Rachel glanced through the terminal windows toward the parked jet. "It already has not left." "Good," the director said. "Keep it that way." Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away, executives from Brooks Capital Partners had abandoned their meeting agenda entirely. They were no longer discussing investments. They were discussing Vanessa. One senior advisor finally reached her personal assistant. "Has she called?" he asked. "No." The answer deepened the concern. Everyone in the room knew Vanessa's habits. She communicated. She updated people. She respected schedules. If she had gone silent, something unusual had happened. Back in the security office, Ethan's phone rang again. This time he answered immediately. His expression changed with every passing second. Vanessa noticed the shift. The confidence disappeared first, then the certainty, then something that looked remarkably like concern. "Understood," Ethan said quietly. "I will handle it." When the call ended, he remained motionless. The room felt smaller somehow. The fluorescent lights seemed brighter. Even the ticking wall clock sounded louder. Finally, Ethan looked directly at Vanessa. For the first time all evening, there was no authority in his voice. No assumption. No distance. Only a question. "Ms. Brooks," he said slowly, "why did you never tell us who you were?" Vanessa looked toward the darkening terminal outside the window and then back at him. Her answer arrived without hesitation. "Because my boarding pass should have been enough." The words lingered in the room long after Vanessa spoke them. My boarding pass should have been enough. Ethan Miller lowered his gaze. There was nothing to argue with, nothing to explain away. The statement was simple, factual, and impossible to ignore. For the first time that evening, he found himself replaying every decision that had led them here. Every assumption, every conclusion reached before evidence existed. Outside the office, the terminal lights reflected against the glass walls as darkness settled over the airport. Flights continued arriving and departing. Travelers hurried past carrying luggage and checking their phones. Yet inside the growing circle of airline leadership, normal operations had begun to disappear. Rachel Evans stood near the gate speaking with another manager when a group of executives emerged from a private elevator at the far end of the terminal. Their pace immediately caught her attention. These were not local supervisors. These were regional leaders. People rarely seen at the airport unless something significant had happened. One of them approached Rachel directly. "You are Rachel Evans?" She nodded. "Yes. We need every detail from the moment this started." Rachel understood immediately. The situation had reached a level far beyond ordinary procedure. Meanwhile, inside corporate headquarters, another meeting had begun. This one included representatives from the airline and senior partners from Brooks Capital Partners. The atmosphere felt nothing like the earlier investment discussion. Phones remained on the table. Legal advisors had joined the call. Public relations executives sat silently taking notes. The missing passenger was no longer simply a passenger. She had become the center of a rapidly growing crisis. One executive finally asked the question everyone had been avoiding. Does Vanessa know about the funding presentation scheduled tomorrow? The answer came instantly. She organized it. Silence followed. The room understood what that meant. The proposed partnership was not merely another business opportunity. Vanessa had personally championed the project for months. She had argued for it, defended it, supported it, and now she was sitting in a security office because someone decided her valid boarding pass was not enough. Back at the airport, Ethan received another call. This time he listened without interrupting. His expression became increasingly serious. When the call ended, he remained seated for several seconds. Vanessa watched quietly. She did not appear angry. That somehow made the situation feel worse. Anger could be dismissed as emotion. Calmness demanded reflection. Ethan finally looked toward her. Corporate leadership is coming here. Vanessa nodded once. I assumed they eventually would. Ethan hesitated. You knew who you were from the beginning. A faint smile crossed her face. I hope so. For the first time all evening, even Ethan almost smiled. The moment passed quickly, but it revealed something important. Vanessa had never tried to intimidate anyone with status. She had never mentioned money, never mentioned titles, never threatened consequences. She simply expected to be treated like every other passenger. Across the terminal, the aircraft that should have departed long ago remained connected to the gate. Passengers were growing restless. Questions were multiplying. Crew members exchanged nervous looks. Nobody understood the full story yet, but everyone sensed something unusual was unfolding. Then a message arrived simultaneously on multiple executive phones throughout the airport. The subject line contained only 3 words. Brooks Capital Partnership. The amount listed beneath it caused several people to stop walking. $5 billion. For a moment, the numbers seemed unreal. Then reality settled in. The woman sitting quietly inside a small airport office was not just an important passenger. She represented one of the largest financial opportunities the airline had ever pursued. And suddenly, every decision made during the last 2 hours carried a price far greater than anyone had imagined. The number spread through executive offices faster than any official announcement. $5 billion. People repeated it in hushed voices as though saying it too loudly might somehow make it disappear. For the airline, the proposed partnership represented expansion, modernization, investor confidence, and years of future growth. For Vanessa Brooks, it had never been about headlines. It had been about opportunity. She believed the airline could become something better. That belief was the reason she had spent months supporting the negotiations. Now she sat quietly in a security office while executives raced across the airport trying to understand how everything had gone so wrong. Rachel Evans watched as more senior leaders arrived near the gate. Their expressions revealed a level of concern she had never witnessed before. Phones remained pressed against ears. Conversations happened in rapid whispers. Managers who normally projected certainty now appeared visibly unsettled. One executive stopped beside Rachel. Where is she? Rachel immediately knew who he meant. Security office near gate 27. The executive closed his eyes briefly. It was the reaction of someone realizing the situation was worse than expected. Across the terminal, Ethan Miller stood near the office window looking out at the runway lights. Aircraft moved slowly through the darkness like glowing ships crossing a black sea. Behind him, Vanessa remained seated exactly as she had been for hours. Calm, patient, unshaken. The contrast between her composure and the growing panic around the airport was impossible to ignore. Ethan finally turned toward her. Corporate leadership will be here shortly. Vanessa nodded. I understand. Ethan hesitated before speaking again. I would like to ask something. Vanessa looked at him. Go ahead. Ethan folded his arms. Why did you stay? The question surprised even him. Vanessa considered it for a moment. Because leaving would not have solved anything. Ethan remained silent. Vanessa continued. People learn very little when consequences arrive before understanding. The answer stayed with him. Outside the office, hurried footsteps echoed down the hallway. A group of executives approached. Their pace slowed as they neared the door. For a brief moment, nobody entered. It was almost as if they needed an extra second to prepare themselves. Inside corporate headquarters, the atmosphere had become equally tense. Representatives from Brooks Capital Partners were receiving updates in real time. One executive reviewed a timeline of events projected across a conference room screen. Boarding completed. Passenger removed. Verification requested. Delay extended. No documented justification. Every new detail deepened the discomfort. One advisor leaned forward. Has Vanessa requested anything? The answer came back immediately. No. Has she threatened legal action? No. Has she demanded special treatment? No. Silence followed. Somehow that made the situation more troubling. Vanessa had not escalated anything. She had simply waited. Back at the airport, the office door finally opened. 3 senior airline leaders stepped inside. Their polished appearance contrasted sharply with the plane room. One carried a tablet. Another held a folder. The third seemed focused entirely on Vanessa. As soon as they entered, Ethan stepped aside. The shift was subtle but unmistakable. Authority in the room had changed. The lead executive offered a careful smile. Ms. Brooks, thank you for your patience. Vanessa looked at him calmly. The words sounded sincere, yet they arrived hours late. Through the office window, the aircraft that should have departed long ago remained motionless at the gate. Its lights glowed against the darkness. A visible reminder that one decision, made in a matter of seconds, had now captured the attention of an entire corporation. And the most important conversation of the night was only beginning. The lead executive stepped farther into the room and carefully closed the door behind him. For a moment, nobody spoke. The quiet felt heavier than any explanation. Vanessa Brooks remained seated, her posture unchanged, her expression calm. The executives standing before her looked nothing like the confident leaders who normally controlled billion-dollar decisions. Tonight they appeared cautious, almost nervous. One of them finally broke the silence. Ms. Brooks, on behalf of the airline, I want to apologize for what has happened. Vanessa listened without interruption. The executive continued. We are conducting an immediate review of every decision that led to this situation. Vanessa nodded politely. I appreciate that. Her response was measured, neither warm nor cold. Ethan Miller stood near the wall, saying nothing. He suddenly felt like an observer inside a story he no longer controlled. The executive opened the folder in his hands. We have confirmed that your ticket was valid. Your identification was valid. There were no security alerts attached to your reservation. He paused before adding the words everyone already knew. You should never have been removed from the aircraft. The admission settled over the room. Vanessa looked toward the window where the aircraft still waited at the gate beneath the night sky. Its lights reflected against the glass like distant stars. That is true, she said quietly. Back in the terminal, Rachel Evans watched as updates continued arriving from headquarters. Employees who rarely communicated directly with airport staff were suddenly requesting reports and timelines. Every few minutes another message appeared. Another call. Another question. The story was moving through the organization at incredible speed. Yet one detail appeared in nearly every conversation. Not the $5 billion. Not the delayed flight. The question people kept asking was much simpler. Why was she removed in the first place? Nobody seemed able to answer. Inside the security office, another executive stepped forward. A car is waiting to take you wherever you need to go. We can arrange private transportation tonight. We can arrange another aircraft if necessary. Vanessa smiled faintly. That is very generous. The executive looked relieved. Then Vanessa added, but none of those things solve the actual problem. The relief disappeared immediately. Across the room, Ethan lowered his eyes. He understood exactly what she meant. Vanessa slowly stood from her chair and picked up her leather travel bag. After hours inside the small office, the simple movement seemed to change the energy of the room. Everyone watched her. Not because of her title. Not because of her wealth. Because she had remained dignified throughout an experience that would have made many people angry. Vanessa looked toward the executives. Do you know what concerns me most? Nobody answered. It is not that I was delayed. Her voice remained calm. It is not that I missed a meeting. She glanced briefly toward Ethan and then toward the others. It is that every system in your company confirmed I belonged on that aircraft. Yet somehow that was not enough. Silence followed. No executive offered a response. No policy explanation appeared. No carefully prepared statement could erase the truth of what she had just said. Then another phone vibrated. The executive nearest the door glanced at the screen and immediately froze. A new message had arrived from corporate headquarters. The board of directors wanted an emergency meeting before sunrise. And at the top of the agenda sat a single item. The future of the $5 billion partnership that Vanessa Brooks had spent months helping build. The message from the board of directors changed everything. Executives who had spent the evening trying to contain a problem now understood they were facing something much larger. This was no longer about a delayed flight. It was about trust, reputation, judgment, and the possibility that one decision made in a matter of minutes could unravel years of work. Inside the security office, the senior airline leaders exchanged uneasy glances. Vanessa Brooks stood quietly beside her chair, holding the same leather bag she had carried onto the aircraft hours earlier. Nothing about her appearance suggested power. Nothing about her demeanor demanded attention. Yet every person in the room now understood that her next decision could affect thousands of employees and billions of dollars. One executive cleared his throat. "Ms. Brooks, the board would like to speak with you directly." Vanessa nodded. "I assumed they might." The executive offered a cautious smile. "They are arranging a conference call immediately." Vanessa glanced toward the window. The aircraft still waited outside beneath the runway lights. Passengers remained on board. Flight attendants continued managing a situation they barely understood. The entire evening seemed frozen in place. Across the terminal, Rachel Evans watched another group of corporate representatives arrive. She had never seen this many senior leaders at a gate area before. Airport employees whispered among themselves. Rumors traveled quickly. Nobody knew every detail, but everyone sensed the significance. Rachel thought back to the moment Vanessa had boarded. Calm, professional, unremarkable. She wondered how differently the evening might have unfolded if someone had simply trusted the information already in front of them. Meanwhile, Ethan Miller remained silent near the wall. The realization continued settling deeper with every passing minute. He had believed he was protecting the airline, protecting passengers, following instinct. Yet instinct without evidence had brought them here. For the first time in many years, Ethan questioned not only a decision but the assumptions behind it. His phone vibrated again. Another message from leadership. Another request for documentation. Another reminder that every action now mattered. Inside corporate headquarters, directors gathered around screens displaying financial forecasts connected to the partnership. Analysts reviewed projections. Legal teams reviewed reports. Communications advisors prepared contingency plans. Yet despite the numbers, charts, and presentations, the discussion kept returning to the same issue. One director finally said what everyone else was thinking. If this happened to someone with Vanessa's influence, how often does it happen to people without it? The room fell silent. Nobody rushed to answer. Back at the airport, a secure video call was finally established. The tablet carried by one executive lit up as board members appeared on the screen. Their expressions were serious, respectful, concerned. The chairman spoke first. "Ms. Brooks, thank you for taking this call under such difficult circumstances." Vanessa listened quietly. The chairman continued. "Before we discuss business, we want to acknowledge that what happened tonight should not have happened." For a moment, nobody moved. The words felt genuine. Yet Vanessa understood something important. Apologies matter. Accountability matters more. She looked around the room at the executives, the managers, and finally Ethan. Then she returned her attention to the screen. "I appreciate the acknowledgement," she said calmly. "But before we discuss any partnership, there is a question I need your organization to answer." Every face on the screen became still. The room seemed to hold its breath. Vanessa's voice remained steady. "How many people have experienced this same treatment and never had the opportunity to be heard?" The question remained unanswered long after Vanessa Brooks asked it. On the tablet screen, board members exchanged glances. Some shifted in their seats. Others lowered their eyes. The silence itself became an answer. Vanessa did not appear satisfied by it, but she was not surprised either. Throughout her career, she had learned that organizations often moved quickly to address visible mistakes while overlooking the systems that allowed those mistakes to happen in the first place. The chairman finally spoke. "Ms. Brooks, we take that concern seriously." Vanessa nodded politely. "I hope you do." Her voice remained calm. "Because tonight was never really about me." The words landed heavily inside the room. Ethan Miller stood motionless near the wall. For hours he had focused on procedures, reports, and decisions. Now he found himself thinking about people instead. People he had encountered throughout his career. Travelers who looked frustrated. Travelers who felt embarrassed. travelers whose complaints had seemed insignificant at the time. For the first time, he wondered how many stories he had never heard. Across the terminal, Rachel Evans watched airport employees moving through the gate area. The aircraft still sat beneath the bright lights outside. Passengers were finally being rebooked and assisted. The operational disruption would eventually be resolved. The larger issue would not disappear so easily. Rachel checked her phone and saw messages arriving from colleagues across the company. Everyone was discussing the same event. Yet the conversations were changing. Earlier they focused on money. Now they focused on fairness. Back inside the security office, one board member leaned forward on the screen. "Ms. Brooks, we want to make this right." Vanessa considered the statement carefully. "Then start by being honest." The room became still. "Do not tell yourselves this happened because of one mistake," she continued. "One mistake does not survive multiple checkpoints. One mistake does not continue for hours. One mistake does not require executive intervention before someone stops and asks whether the treatment is justified." No one interrupted her. Even the executives standing nearby remained silent. Vanessa was not speaking with anger. She was speaking with clarity. Somehow that made her words impossible to dismiss. Ethan slowly stepped forward. Every eye turned toward him. He looked directly at Vanessa. For a moment, he seemed unsure how to begin. Then he spoke. "I owe you an apology." The room fell silent again. Ethan continued. "Not because of your position, not because of your company, and not because of the partnership." He paused. "I owe you an apology because I made assumptions before I gathered facts." Vanessa listened carefully. Ethan's voice was steady, but the weight behind it was real. "You deserved better treatment than what happened here tonight." For several seconds, nobody moved. Then Vanessa gave a small nod. Not dramatic, not emotional, just acknowledgement. The kind that comes when sincerity finally replaces procedure. Outside the office window, a plane lifted into the night sky. Its lights grew smaller against the darkness until they disappeared completely. Vanessa watched it for a moment. Then she turned back toward the screen filled with directors and executives. The future of the partnership remained uncertain. The future of several careers remained uncertain. But one thing had changed. For the first time all evening, the conversation was no longer about protecting a company. It was about understanding a lesson that should have been obvious from the beginning. Every person deserves dignity before they earn anyone's approval. The room remained quiet after Ethan's apology. Not because people lacked something to say, but because the most important words had already been spoken. Vanessa Brooks looked around the small office one more time. The fluorescent lights, the worn desk, the window overlooking the runway. Hours earlier, it had felt like a place where answers were being withheld. Now it felt like a place where uncomfortable truths had finally surfaced. On the tablet screen, members of the board sat waiting. The chairman folded his hands. "Ms. Brooks, before this evening ends, we would like to know whether the partnership can still move forward." No one moved. No one interrupted. Even the sounds of the airport seemed distant. Vanessa took a slow breath. For months, she had believed in the project. She had studied the airline's plans. She had met with leadership teams. She had advocated for the investment when others questioned it. The opportunity had never been about profit alone. It had been about helping modernize an organization that connected millions of people. Yet standing there now, she understood that airplanes were not the only things carrying passengers. Companies carried values. Cultures carried habits. Decisions carried consequences. "I have spent my career evaluating risk," Vanessa said calmly. "Most people think risk is financial. Sometimes it is. But sometimes the greatest risk is believing a problem does not exist because it has not affected you personally." Several board members lowered their eyes. The chairman listened carefully. Vanessa continued. "Tonight revealed something important. Not about me. About your organization." The words settled heavily across the call. The systems worked. My ticket was valid. My identification was valid. The records were accurate. Yet despite all of that, a decision was made that should never have happened. No one disagreed. Rachel Evans stood quietly near the doorway, listening. She realized the conversation had moved far beyond one passenger and one flight. It had become a conversation about character. Across the room, Ethan remained silent. He understood that whatever happened next would extend far beyond his own future. Vanessa glanced toward the window again. Another aircraft rolled across the runway beneath the glow of blue taxiway lights. For a moment, she watched it move through the darkness. Then she looked back at the screen. I have made a decision. Every face became still. The chairman leaned forward slightly. Vanessa's voice remained steady. Brooks Capital Partners will withdraw from the current $5 billion funding agreement. The announcement landed with quiet force. No gasps. No dramatic reactions. Just silence. The kind of silence that follows irreversible decisions. Yet before anyone could respond, Vanessa continued. Not because I want revenge. She looked directly into the camera. And not because I want punishment. The board members listened carefully. I am withdrawing because trust must exist before investment. Tonight showed me that trust has not been fully earned yet. The chairman slowly nodded. Disappointment appeared on several faces, but so did understanding. Vanessa picked up her bag. When meaningful change happens, perhaps we can have another conversation in the future. No threats. No anger. No celebration. Just a boundary drawn with dignity. And somehow that made the decision more powerful than any confrontation ever could. As the call ended and the screens went dark, everyone in the room understood the same thing. The $5 billion had been lost. But the lesson left behind would remain far longer. When Vanessa Brooks stepped out of the security office, the airport felt strangely quiet. Not because the terminal had emptied. Travelers still moved between gates. Rolling suitcases still crossed polished floors. Announcements still echoed overhead. Yet for those who had witnessed the events of the evening, something had changed. The urgency was gone. The arguments were gone. What remained was reflection. Rachel Evans stood near the doorway as Vanessa approached. For a moment, neither woman spoke. Then Rachel offered a sincere smile. I am sorry for what happened. Vanessa returned the smile. Thank you. The exchange lasted only seconds, but it felt more meaningful than many of the formal statements delivered throughout the night. Rachel had not spoken as a representative of a company. She had spoken as a person. Sometimes that difference mattered most. Across the terminal, Ethan Miller stood alone near a window overlooking the runway. He watched aircraft lights move through the darkness beyond the glass. The evening had forced him to confront questions he had never seriously asked himself before. Questions about judgment, assumptions, responsibility. He heard approaching footsteps and turned. Vanessa had stopped a few feet away. For a moment, neither said anything. Then Ethan nodded respectfully. I will remember this night for the rest of my life. Vanessa looked toward the runway. So will I. Ethan hesitated. I wish I could change how it started. Vanessa considered the statement. None of us can change what already happened. Her voice remained calm. We can only decide what we learn from it. Ethan slowly nodded. He understood. No dramatic speeches were necessary. No further apologies were required. The lesson had already arrived. Several minutes later, a black sedan waited outside the terminal entrance. The cool night air carried the distant sound of aircraft engines, and blinking runway lights stretched across the horizon. Vanessa placed her bag in the back seat and paused before entering the vehicle. Behind the glass walls of the terminal, people continued working. Some would remember the evening for a few days. Others for a few weeks. A handful would remember it forever. Back at corporate headquarters, emergency meetings continued long into the night. Policies would be reviewed. Procedures would be examined. Difficult conversations would take place. But the most important outcome could not be measured in reports or spreadsheets. It existed in the minds of people who had witnessed what happens when assumptions replace facts. Vanessa settled into the back seat as the car pulled away from the airport. Her phone finally came alive with missed calls, messages, and updates from colleagues waiting to hear from her. She glanced at the screen and then looked out the window instead. The city lights drifted past in soft reflections. The partnership was gone. $5 billion would not move forward. Yet strangely, she felt no satisfaction in that outcome. Only hope that the lesson would matter. Behind her, another aircraft lifted into the night sky and disappeared beyond the clouds. Vanessa watched its lights fade until they became invisible. Then she leaned back and closed her eyes. She had not changed the entire world that evening. She had not solved every problem. But somewhere inside an airport, inside a boardroom, and inside a few human hearts, something had shifted. And sometimes that was where real change began. The night moved forward quietly, carrying airplanes, travelers, and possibilities into the darkness ahead.